At 61, I cried when it slipped in, and it wasn't the first time he surprised me. I paused for a moment, feeling my face flush warm. Even after all this time, I still blush talking about it. But that's part of the story too, I suppose. Not that anyone needs to know that. Yet. My name is Helen. I spent 30 years teaching second graders in Ukiah, a small town nestled in the vineyards and redwoods of Northern California. It's the kind of place where everyone knows everyone's business, where the same families have lived for generations, where tradition isn't just respected, it's expected. I taught hundreds of children to read and write. I watched them grow up, have children of their own, who sometimes became my students too. Everyone in town knew me as Miss Helen, that quiet woman with her hair always pinned back, sensible clothes, and a kind but reserved smile. The reliable one, the proper one. At least that's how they saw me before I discovered who I really was underneath it all. People assume that when you get older, your body starts drying up inside, that desires fade away with youth. As if after 60, you become just a shell of memories, without wants or needs or fire. I believed that for a long time too. Sitting in my usual chair, watching the same TV shows, lying in the same cold bed, until that afternoon at the local clinic when a pair of green eyes looked at me differently. I had never felt that before. Or rather, I had felt it so long ago I'd forgotten what it was like. That warmth rising from my stomach, my heart beating faster, my hands getting clammy with nervousness. All because of a simple, "Good morning, Helen. You look lovely today." But is that something you say to a woman with gray hair? To a grandmother of 3? To a woman whose own husband hadn't really looked at her in over a decade? My church friends nearly fell off their chairs when they found out. My children stopped visiting. The neighbors whispered when I walked by. Look at the teacher. Who would have thought? With a man young enough to be her son. But none of them felt what I felt on that rainy night when I finally let someone touch me again. When I allowed young hands to discover every part of my body that I myself had forgotten existed. If you're judging me right now, perhaps you should wait until you hear the whole story. Because nobody knows what it's like to wake up one day and realize you've spent your entire life being invisible. That you've spent decades doing everything for others and nothing for yourself. It's funny how life takes unexpected turns. How you think you know the path, and suddenly you find yourself in places you never imagined. Me, who was always the proper woman, the perfect wife, the devoted mother, the respected teacher. But I'll tell you more about that in a moment. First, I need to explain how an entire lifetime of routine can turn upside down in a matter of days, and how, sometimes, you need to break everything to finally find yourself. The story I'm about to tell you might shock some people. It certainly shocked my family, my neighbors, and pretty much everyone in Ukiah. But it's my story, my awakening at an age when most people think life is winding down, not beginning anew. So let me take you back to where it all started. To the moment when I realized that the woman staring back at me in the mirror, the one with silver streaks in her hair and lines around her eyes, wasn't just somebody's wife, somebody's mother, somebody's grandmother. She was me. Helen, a woman with a beating heart and a body that could still feel. A woman who had the courage to choose herself, finally, after all those years. A woman who discovered that passion doesn't have an expiration date. Ukiah isn't San Francisco or Los Angeles. It's not even close. It's a small town tucked away in Mendocino County, about 2 hours north of San Francisco, if you're driving on Highway 101. It's the kind of place where the same families have lived for generations, where people still nod hello when they pass each other on the street, and where your business becomes everyone's business faster than you can say small town. My life there was as predictable as the seasons. I lived in a modest 2-bedroom house on Oak Street with a small front yard where I grew roses and a backyard with an apple tree that gave more fruit than I could ever use. I'd bought the place with Carl 30 years ago, when property in Northern California was still somewhat affordable on 2 middle-class salaries. Not like now. Carl and I had our routine down to a science after 40 years of marriage. He'd wake up at 5:30 every morning, make coffee, and sit at the kitchen table reading the local newspaper or watching the news on the small TV we kept on the counter. By the time I'd get up at 6:15, he'd already be on his second cup, barely looking up when I entered the room. "Morning," he'd say, his eyes never leaving the paper. "Good morning," I'd reply, pouring myself coffee in the same blue mug I'd been using for 20 years. And that was our morning conversation, complete. I'd make breakfast, usually toast and eggs, sometimes oatmeal when the weather turned cold. We'd eat in silence, the only sounds being the clink of silverware on plates and the occasional rustle of newspaper pages turning. After breakfast, Carl would go out to his workshop in the garage. Before retiring, he'd been a contractor, building houses all over Mendocino County. Now he spent his days making birdhouses that he sold at the local farmers market on Saturdays. He was good with his hands, always had been. Just not with words, or feelings, or with me. Our house was clean and well kept, if a little outdated. The same floral sofa had sat in our living room since 1992. The kitchen still had the oak cabinets that had been fashionable in the 80s. The bedroom walls were still the same pale yellow we'd painted them when we first moved in. Nothing changed because neither of us saw any reason for change. We were comfortable, or so I thought. Comfortable like an old shoe, worn out but familiar. At night, we'd have dinner at exactly 6:30. Carl would have his one beer of the day, and I'd sometimes have a glass of white wine. We'd watch the news, then whatever was on TV. By 9, he'd be yawning and heading to bed. I'd stay up a little longer, reading or watching something he didn't care for, like those British mystery shows on PBS. Then I'd join him in our queen-sized bed, careful to stay on my side of the invisible line that had formed down the middle of the mattress over the years. We shared a bed like two strangers waiting for different trains, occupying the same space but headed in separate directions. His back would be turned to me and mine to him. No goodnight kiss, no touching hands, nothing. It had been that way for at least a decade, so long that I'd stopped noticing how strange it was, how empty it made me feel. The last time Carl had touched me intimately was on my 50th birthday. I remember because it was such a surprise, so unexpected that it almost felt awkward. After that night, nothing. At first I'd tried initiating, reaching across that invisible line in bed. He'd pat my hand and say he was tired, or his back hurt, or he had an early morning. After a while, I stopped trying, stopped hoping, stopped feeling, or at least I thought I had stopped feeling. Turns out, my body was just hibernating, waiting for someone to wake it up. Carl and I had been married for 40 years. 40 years of sharing a house, raising children, and gradually becoming strangers to each other. He was 68, a retired contractor who had built half the houses in Mendocino County during his prime. He was a man of routines, of schedules, of precise expectations. Coffee at 5:30, bed at 9 Kai, Sunday paper read cover to cover. Every headline murmured under his breath as if cataloging the world's disasters was a weekly duty. His hands were strong, calloused from decades of work, even now when they mostly crafted birdhouses in his garage workshop. Those hands had built our home, had fixed countless broken things, had once cradled our newborn children. But somewhere along the way, those hands had forgotten how to touch me, how to reach across the bed at night, how to rest gently on my shoulder when I was cooking, how to trace the curve of my cheek just because. Carl wasn't a bad man. He never drank too much, never gambled away our savings, never looked at other women, at least not that I knew of. He was responsible, dependable, steady. He was just absent. Physically present, but emotionally gone, as if over the years his heart had quietly packed its bags and left, leaving behind a man who went through the motions of a life we once shared. I don't know exactly when I stopped being a wife and became a housekeeper who occasionally shared his bed. It happened so gradually that I hardly noticed. A kiss goodbye that became a nod, a conversation that became a grunt, a touch that became a memory. And then I met Jason. It was a Tuesday in April when I went for my annual checkup and met the new nurse practitioner. After that first appointment, I found myself thinking about him at odd moments, while washing dishes, while deadheading roses in my garden, while lying awake in bed staring at the ceiling. I told myself it was silly, that I was being ridiculous, that a woman my age shouldn't be daydreaming about a man young enough to be her son. But a week later, I found a reason to go back to the clinic. Nothing serious, just a slight cough that I convinced myself might be bronchitis. When Jason came into the examination room, my heart did that strange little flutter again. "Mrs. Bennett, nice to see you again," he said, smiling. "Though I'm sorry you're not feeling well. Just a cough," I said, suddenly embarrassed by my flimsy excuse. "Probably nothing." "Well, let's check it out anyway." He listened to my chest with his stethoscope, his head bent close to mine. I could smell his aftershave, something clean and subtle, not overpowering. "Take a deep breath for me." I did as he asked, all too aware of his proximity, of his hand gentle against my back, of how long it had been since anyone had touched me with such care. "Your lungs sound clear," he said, straightening up. "But let me check your throat just to be sure." As he examined me, I noticed details about him I had missed during our first meeting. The small scar near his right eyebrow, the way his hair curled slightly at the nape of his neck, the wedding band? No, wait. There was no wedding band. His left hand was bare. "Everything looks fine," he said finally. "Probably just a bit of spring allergies. Are you new to the area? Mendocino County has some pretty potent pollen." "No, I've lived here most of my life." "Then you know all about our famous pollen season?" He smiled. "I'm still getting used to it. Chicago doesn't have quite the same botanical enthusiasm." I laughed at that, surprised by how natural it felt. "What brought you from Chicago to Ukiah? That's quite a change." His smile faded slightly. "A fresh start. I was working at a busy hospital there, 80-hour weeks, constant stress. My mother got sick last year, cancer. She recovered, but it made me rethink some things. Life's too short to spend it all working, you know?" I nodded, though I wasn't sure I did know. My life had been defined by routine, by small, safe circles, home to school and back when I was teaching, now home to the grocery store, the garden club, the church. I couldn't remember the last time I'd done anything that required courage, that involved risk or change. "Well, Ukiah's certainly quieter than Chicago," I said. "Some would say too quiet." "I like it," he said. "People know each other. They wave when you pass them on the street. In Chicago, you can live next door to someone for years and never even learn their name." "Small towns have their downsides too," I said, thinking of the gossip, the judgment, the way everyone knew everyone's business. "We're all in each other's pockets here." "I'm learning that," he laughed. "My neighbor already knows what time I leave for work, what kind of car I drive, and has strong opinions about the fact that I don't mow my lawn on the same day as everyone else on the block." I found myself smiling again, enjoying the easy back and forth. It had been so long since I'd had a real conversation with someone, not just the polite exchanges at the grocery store or the formulaic discussions at church coffee hour, but an actual conversation where words flowed naturally, where smiles came unbidden. "So," he said, making a note in my chart, "for that cough, I'd recommend some over-the-counter antihistamine. And maybe," he looked up, his green eyes meeting mine, "maybe try to get out a bit more. Vitamin D works wonders this time of year. The city park has some nice walking paths." Was he just being a conscientious healthcare provider, or was there something more to his suggestion? I told myself I was being foolish, that he was simply doing his job. "Thank you," I said, gathering my purse. "I'll try that." As I stood to leave, he said, "Mrs. Bennett, Helen, I walk in the park sometimes after my shift, around 6. The oak path is particularly nice this time of year." My heart did that strange little flip again. "Good to know," I said, suddenly flustered. I left the clinic feeling oddly light, almost giddy. It was ridiculous, this schoolgirl reaction to a simple conversation. I was 61 years old, a grandmother, a retired schoolteacher. I had no business feeling this way about a man nearly 3 decades younger than me. But as I drove home, I found myself thinking about the park, about its winding paths beneath old oak trees. I couldn't remember the last time I'd gone there, though it was only a few blocks from our house. Carl didn't care for walks. "What's the point of walking when you're not going anywhere?" he'd say. And so, like so many other small pleasures, I'd given it up over the years. When I got home, Carl was in his workshop as usual. I could hear the whine of his saw through the garage door. I went inside, put away my purse, and stood in the kitchen for a long moment, looking out the window at our backyard. The apple tree was in bloom, its branches heavy with white blossoms. In a few months, there would be more apples than we could eat. I'd make pies, applesauce, apple butter, and still have bushels left over to give away to neighbors, just like last year, and the year before, and the year before that. I opened my closet and looked at my clothes. Practical slacks, sensible blouses, cardigans in neutral colors. Nothing bright, nothing eye-catching, nothing that would make anyone look twice at a woman of my age. But at the back of the closet, there was a dress I'd bought years ago for Sarah's college graduation. Navy blue with small white flowers, fitted at the waist, falling just below my knees. I'd loved that dress but had only worn it once. Where would a woman like me wear such a thing in Ukiah? I took it out and held it against me, looking in the mirror. My hair was pulled back in its usual bun, my face bare of makeup except for a touch of lipstick. When had I become this faded version of myself? This woman who blended into the background, who took up as little space as possible, who asked for nothing? I hung the dress back up, but not at the back of the closet this time. I put it where I could see it, where it would remind me of something, though I wasn't quite sure what. The next day was Wednesday, my usual lunch with Margaret at the Ukiah Garden Cafe. Margaret had been my friend since our children were in elementary school together. She was a widow now, her husband having passed away 5 years ago from a heart attack. She lived alone in the house they'd shared, taught piano lessons to neighborhood children, and seemed content with her life. "You seem different today," she said, as we sat at our usual table by the window. "Something happen?" "Different how?" I asked, though I knew what she meant. I'd spent more time than usual on my appearance that morning. I'd put on mascara and blush, had let my hair down from its usual bun, had even worn a coral-colored blouse instead of my usual beige or gray. "I don't know. You look brighter somehow." She studied me over her reading glasses. "Did you change your hair?" "Just wore it down for a change," I said, self-consciously touching the strands that fell around my shoulders. "It looks nice that way. You should do it more often." She took a sip of her tea. "So what's new? How's Carl?" "The same," I said, which was all that needed to be said. Margaret knew about my marriage, about its slow, quiet disintegration. Not because I complained, I didn't, but because she was observant, because she'd known me for 30 years, because she'd seen the light in my eyes gradually dim. "And the kids? How's Sarah's new job?" After that first day at the park, I found myself thinking about Jason constantly. It wasn't just his physical appearance that had captivated me, though he was certainly handsome with those green eyes and that warm smile. It was the way he made me feel, seen, heard, interesting. After years of being invisible to my own husband, being truly noticed by someone was intoxicating. I found myself doing things I hadn't done in years. I started taking more care with my appearance each morning. Instead of just pulling my hair back in its usual bun, I'd style it, leaving it loose around my shoulders or pinning it in softer ways. I started wearing the bolder lipsticks I'd bought, not just at the park, but during the day too. One morning, as I was getting dressed, I opened my underwear drawer and realized everything in it was beige or white, plain cotton, practical. When had I stopped caring about feeling pretty underneath my clothes? On impulse, I drove to the mall in Santa Rosa, a larger town about 30 minutes from Ukiah, where I wouldn't run into anyone I knew. I went into a department store and bought new underwear, still modest, but in soft colors, with a bit of lace trim. Nothing scandalous, just pretty. The kind that made me feel like a woman, not just somebody's grandmother. I even found myself shaving my legs again, something I'd grown lazy about over the years. After all, who was going to notice or care? But now, as I smoothed lotion over my skin after my shower, I felt a small thrill of anticipation. Not that Jason would ever see my legs, of course. Our walks in the park were just friendly conversations. But still, knowing my legs were smooth under my slacks made me feel more put together, more aware of my body as something other than just a vessel that carried me from one chore to the next. The next time I saw Jason at the park, he noticed the changes. "You look different today, Helen," he said as we strolled along the oak path. "Did you change your hair?" "Just wearing it down," I said, feeling a blush creep up my neck. "I usually keep it up in a bun. It's easier." "It suits you this way," he said. "Makes your eyes brighter somehow." I felt that flutter in my stomach again, that schoolgirl nervousness that should have been ridiculous at my age, but somehow wasn't. We continued our walks nearly every evening, weather permitting. Sometimes we'd sit on the bench overlooking the pond, feeding the ducks with breadcrumbs I'd bring from home. Sometimes we'd walk the entire perimeter of the park, talking about everything and nothing. His patients, no names of course, just funny stories, my former students, books we'd both read, movies we'd seen. I learned that he loved old black and white movies, just like I did. That he had a cat named Einstein who could open doors by himself. That he played the guitar but claimed he wasn't very good. That he'd wanted to be a doctor since he was a child, when his grandfather had been saved by a quick-thinking emergency room physician. And he learned about me, too. Not just the superficial things, but the deeper parts I'd kept hidden for so long. I told him about my dreams of traveling to Europe, something Carl had never been interested in. About how I sometimes wrote poetry, but never showed it to anyone. About how I missed teaching, missed being around young, curious minds. "You should teach again," he said one evening as we sat watching the sunset over the pond. "Maybe volunteer at the library's literacy program? I bet they'd love to have an experienced teacher." "Maybe," I said, though I hadn't considered it before. "I'm not sure if I'm up to date with modern teaching methods anymore." "Some things don't change," he said. "The ability to connect with people, to explain things clearly, to care. Those are timeless." That was the thing about Jason. He made me see myself differently. Not as an old woman put out to pasture, but as someone with skills and talents and experiences that still had value. One evening in late May, about a month after we'd started our walks, the weather turned unexpectedly. We were at the farthest point of the trail when the sky darkened suddenly and fat raindrops began to fall. "We're going to get soaked," I said, looking up at the angry clouds. "Come on," Jason said, taking my hand. "There's a gazebo over there." His hand was warm and strong around mine. It was the first time we'd touched beyond the briefest, most accidental contacts. He led me quickly along the path to a small white gazebo that sat on a little rise overlooking the park. We ducked inside just as the rain began to pour in earnest. "That was close," he laughed, running a hand through his damp hair. I was breathless, not from the brief run, but from the feel of his hand holding mine. He hadn't let go even after we were safely under cover. We stood there, rain drumming on the roof of the gazebo, our hands still linked, looking at each other. Then, slowly, he released my hand. But instead of stepping away, he reached up and gently brushed a strand of wet hair from my face. "Helen," he said softly, his eyes never leaving mine. I couldn't speak. My heart was pounding so hard I was sure he could hear it over the sound of the rain. His fingers lingered on my cheek, warm against my skin. "I think I'm falling for you," he said simply. "I know it's probably crazy. I know there are a million reasons why this doesn't make sense. But I can't stop thinking about you." I felt lightheaded, like I might float away if not for his touch anchoring me. "Jason, I'm 61 years old," I whispered. "You're, 33? 33 next month," he nodded. "And I don't care about the age difference. I care about you, about how I feel when I'm with you, about how you make me see the world differently, notice things I would have missed." "People will talk," I said, though the words sounded hollow even to me. They'll say terrible things. Let them, he said, his hand now cupping my cheek fully. What they say doesn't change what I feel. Then, with a gentleness that nearly broke my heart, he leaned down and kissed me. Just a brief touch of his lips against mine, soft as a whisper, but it sent electricity coursing through my entire body. When he pulled back, I saw uncertainty in his eyes for the first time. Worry that he'd crossed a line, that I would reject him. I should have. I should have told him this was inappropriate, impossible. I should have reminded him that I was married, that I was old enough to be his mother. I should have walked away. Instead, I reached up and touched his face, my fingers tracing the slight stubble on his jaw. I feel it too, I admitted, the words coming out before I could stop them. Every time I see you, every time we talk. But it scares me, Jason. I haven't felt this way in, God, I don't even know how long. His smile was like the sun coming out after a storm. It scares me too, he said. But some things are worth being scared for. The rain continued to pour around us, cocooning us in our own little world. We sat on the bench inside the gazebo, talking in low voices, our shoulders touching. He didn't kiss me again, but he held my hand, his thumb tracing small circles on my palm. Each tiny touch sent shivers up my arm. When the rain finally let up, he walked me back to the park entrance. We were both soaked despite the shelter of the gazebo, my hair plastered to my head, his shirt clinging to his chest. But I barely noticed the discomfort. I felt like I was walking on air. "Can I see you tomorrow?" he asked, as we reached the point where we would go our separate ways. "Yes," I said, not even pretending to hesitate. "Not at the park," he said. "I want to take you somewhere. Dinner, maybe? There's a nice place in Healdsburg, about a half hour from here. No one from Ukiah would see us there." The thought of being seen in public with him on what would clearly be a date made my stomach clench with both excitement and fear. But I nodded. "I'd like that." "I'll pick you up," he said, then paused. "Or would it be better to meet there? I don't want to cause problems with your husband." "Meet there," I said quickly. The thought of Carl seeing Jason, of having to explain who he was and why he was at our door, was too much to contemplate. "I can tell Carl I'm having dinner with Margaret." The lie came easily to my lips, though I'd never been much of a liar before. Jason nodded, not judging. "I'll text you the address and time." Then, looking around quickly to make sure we were alone, he leaned down and kissed me again. A little longer this time, but still gentle, still tentative. When we parted, I walked home in a daze, barely feeling the wet clothes clinging to my skin or the squish of water in my shoes. All I could think about was the softness of his lips, the warmth of his hand, the look in his eyes when he'd said he was falling for me. At home, Carl barely glanced up when I came in, dripping water onto the entryway floor. "Got caught in the rain?" he asked, eyes still on the TV. "Yes," I said, hanging my wet jacket on the hook by the door. "I was at the park when it started." He replied, already focused back on his program. I went to the bathroom, stripped off my wet clothes, and stood looking at myself in the full-length mirror on the back of the door. My body was not the body of a young woman. My breasts had softened and fallen with age, my stomach bore the slight pouch from 2 pregnancies, my thighs had lost their firmness. There were age spots on my shoulders, creepy skin on my upper arms, the beginnings of varicose veins on my calves. But it was also a body that had lived, that had carried and birthed children, that had known pleasure, that had weathered illness and recovered, that had carried me through 6 decades of life. Could a young man like Jason really desire this body? Or was it just my company he enjoyed, my conversation, my attention? The next day, I found myself obsessing over what to wear for our dinner. I tried on practically everything in my closet, dismissing outfits for being too dowdy, too matronly, too young, too revealing. I finally settled on a simple wrap dress in a deep plum color that brought out the blue in my eyes, with a modest neckline and a hem that fell just below my knees. I added a silver necklace that Sarah had given me for Christmas a few years back, but that I rarely wore, and a pair of comfortable but elegant low heels. I told Carl I was having dinner with Margaret to discuss a fundraiser for the church. Another lie. They were becoming too easy. "Don't wait up," I said as I grabbed my purse and keys. "You know how Margaret gets talking." He nodded absently, already in his recliner with the remote in hand. "Have fun." The restaurant Jason had chosen was a small, elegant place on a side street in Healdsburg with white tablecloths and soft lighting. When I arrived, he was already waiting at a table in the back, somewhat secluded. He stood as I approached, his eyes widening appreciatively. "You look beautiful," he said, pulling out my chair. "Thank you," I replied, settling into my seat and placing my napkin in my lap to hide my trembling hands. "This is a lovely place." "I came here once when I first moved to the area," he said. "I always thought it would be nice to come back with someone special." The way he looked at me when he said special made my heart race. I couldn't remember the last time a man had looked at me that way. With genuine desire, with admiration, with intent. Dinner was wonderful. The food was delicious, the wine was excellent, but what made it truly special was the conversation. We talked for hours about everything and nothing, about our childhoods, our dreams, our disappointments, about books we'd read and places we'd been, about the small moments that had shaped our lives. At one point, he reached across the table and took my hand. His thumb traced circles on my wrist, a gentle, almost absent-minded caress that nevertheless sent sparks shooting up my arm. "Your hands are so elegant," he said, studying my fingers. "A pianist's hands." I laughed softly. "I took lessons for years as a child, but I was never very good. I can play for Elise, and that's about it." "I'd like to hear you play sometime," he said, and the simple domesticity of that wish, the implication that we would have many more moments together, quiet evenings where I might sit at a piano while he listened, made my throat tight with emotion. The days that followed were filled with a sweet, secret excitement that made me feel like a teenager again. Jason and I continued to meet, sometimes for lunch in nearby towns, sometimes for walks in the park, once for an afternoon drive along the beautiful coastal highway north of Mendocino. Each time we were together, the connection between us grew stronger, more undeniable. I found myself living a double life. There was the Helen who made Carl's breakfast every morning, who attended church on Sundays, who chatted with neighbors about the weather and the upcoming 4th of July parade. And then there was the Helen who met Jason in out-of-the-way cafes, whose heart raced when he touched her hand across the table, who had begun to dream of possibilities she had long ago dismissed. One evening in late June, we were walking in a park in Healdsburg after having dinner at a small Italian restaurant. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the grass, and the air was warm and fragrant with the scent of roses from a nearby garden. Jason took my hand as we walked, his fingers laced with mine. It felt both thrilling and natural, this simple act of affection that had been absent from my life for so long. "Helen," he said, stopping under the spreading branches of an old oak tree. "There's something I need to tell you." My heart skipped a beat. This was it, I thought. The moment when he would say this had been fun, but it was time to end it. The moment when reality would intrude on this beautiful dream I'd been living. "I've been offered a position at a hospital in Sacramento," he said. "It's a good opportunity. Better pay, more responsibility." "Oh," I said, trying to hide my disappointment. Sacramento was almost 3 hours from Ukiah. "When would you start?" "In a month. But Helen, I don't want to take it if it means leaving you." I stared at him, not comprehending. "What do you mean?" "I mean that I'm in love with you," he said simply. "And the thought of not seeing you every day is unbearable." Love. The word hung in the air between us, powerful and terrifying. I had been so careful not to use that word, even in my own thoughts. It was too big, too consequential. It demanded decisions, changes, risks I wasn't sure I was ready to take. "Jason," I began, my voice trembling slightly. You know my situation. I'm married. I'm decades older than you. We've been living in this bubble. It's not real life. It's the most real thing I've ever felt, he said, his eyes intense in the fading light. Helen, I know there are complications. I know the age difference makes people uncomfortable. But when I'm with you, none of that matters. All that matters is how I feel when I'm with you, how we are together. And how do you feel? I asked, scarcely able to breathe. Alive, he said. Complete. Like I've found someone who sees me, really sees me. Not just the surface, but all of me. His words echoed my own feelings so perfectly that tears sprang to my eyes. That was exactly it, the feeling of being truly seen after years of invisibility. I feel the same way, I admitted. But Jason, there's so much standing in our way. My marriage, my family, what people would say. Do you love your husband? He asked directly. The question caught me off guard. Did I love Carl? I had been married to him for 40 years. We had built a life together, raised children, shared a home. But love? The kind of love that made your heart race, that made you want to be a better person, that made you feel alive? No, I hadn't felt that for Carl in many, many years, if ever. I care about him, I said finally. We have a history together. But no, I don't love him. Not in the way you mean. And do you love me? Jason asked, his voice gentle but insistent. I looked up at him, this beautiful young man who had somehow seen past my age, past my carefully constructed facade, to the woman I truly was inside. The woman I had almost forgotten existed. Yes, I whispered. I do love you. But I'm scared, Jason. I'm terrified of what that means, of what comes next. He pulled me close then, his arms encircling me, his face buried in my hair. We'll figure it out together, he murmured. All I know is that I don't want to lose you. I don't want to go to Sacramento without you. We stood there, holding each other, as the sun slipped below the horizon and the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. In that moment, I felt a peace and a rightness I hadn't experienced in decades. But beneath that peace was a growing understanding that difficult choices lay ahead, that our little bubble couldn't remain intact much longer. The next day was a Saturday. Carl had gone to the farmer's market to sell his birdhouses, as he did every weekend. I was alone in the house, sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee, thinking about my conversation with Jason the night before. My phone chimed with a text message. It was from him. Meet me at our spot in the park. Need to talk. My heart raced. What more was there to say? We had admitted our feelings, but we hadn't made any decisions, hadn't charted any path forward. Part of me wanted to ignore the message, to retreat to the safety of my familiar life. But a stronger part, the part that had been awakening over these past weeks, made me type a reply. Be there in 20 minutes. I changed quickly into a casual dress, one of my new purchases, a simple cotton dress in a soft green that brought out the blue in my eyes. I brushed my hair, applied a touch of the rose lipstick that had become my signature, and slipped on comfortable sandals. As I was grabbing my purse, I heard the front door open. Carl was back early. Going somewhere? He asked, seeing me dressed up. Just for a walk, I said, trying to sound casual. It's such a beautiful day. He looked at me more closely than he had in years. You look different lately. Do I? I tried to keep my voice light. You're always going out, always on your phone. Is there something I should know? For a moment, I considered telling him everything, getting it all out in the open. But I couldn't form the words. Not yet. Not until I was sure of what I wanted. I've just been trying to get out more, doctor's orders, for my health. He nodded slowly, not entirely convinced, but not willing to press further. All right, don't be too long. I thought we might have lunch together. I won't be long, I promised, feeling a pang of guilt. Another lie in what had become a tapestry of deception. At the park, Jason was waiting at our usual spot by the pond. He was pacing, his hands thrust deep in the pockets of his jeans. When he saw me, his face lit up with a smile that made my heart skip. "I was afraid you wouldn't come," he said as I approached. "I almost didn't," I admitted. "Carl came home early from the market." Jason's face grew serious. "That's partly why I wanted to see you. Helen, we need to make some decisions. I can't keep seeing you like this, in secret, stealing moments. It's not fair to any of us. Not to you, not to me, not even to your husband." "I know," I said quietly. "But I'm scared, Jason. Leaving Carl would mean turning my whole life upside down. Where would I go? What would people say? My children would be horrified." "Come with me," he said simply. "To Sacramento. We could start fresh, somewhere no one knows us, where we can just be Helen and Jason without all the judgment." The idea was both terrifying and exhilarating. Leave Ukiah? Leave the home I'd lived in for decades? Leave everything familiar behind? "I need time to think," I said. "This isn't just about us. It's about the life I've built here, the people I care about." "I understand," he said, taking my hands in his. "But I need you to know how serious I am about this, about us. I'm not just asking you to have an affair with me, Helen. I'm asking you to build a life with me." We sat on the bench, holding hands, watching the ducks glide across the pond. The enormity of the choice before me was overwhelming. To stay in my safe, familiar, emotionally barren marriage, or to risk everything for a chance at true happiness with a man who made me feel more alive than I had in decades. "Can I have a week?" I asked finally. "To sort things out, to decide what I want to do?" "Of course," he said, squeezing my hand. "I would wait for you forever if I had to. But Helen, whatever you decide, I want you to do it for yourself, not for me. You deserve to be happy, whether that's with me or not." We walked back to the entrance of the park, more subdued than usual. As we were about to part, Jason pulled me to him and kissed me, right there in the open, not caring who might see. "I love you," he whispered. "Never forget that." As I walked home, my mind was a whirlwind of thoughts and emotions. Could I really do this? Could I leave my husband of 40 years for a man nearly half my age? What would my children say? My friends? The entire town of Ukiah? I was so lost in thought that I didn't notice the car parked across the street from the park or the person watching me from inside it. When I got home, Carl was in the kitchen making a sandwich. "Good walk?" he asked. "Yes, lovely," I replied, hanging my purse on the hook by the door. "Your daughter called while you were out?" he said, his back to me as he spread mayonnaise on bread. "She wants you to call her back." My heart froze. Sarah never called on Saturdays. She was always too busy with her kids' activities. Did she say what she wanted? No, just that it was important. I went to the bedroom to call her, closing the door behind me. Sarah answered on the second ring. "Mom," she said, and I could tell from her voice that something was wrong. "I need to talk to you about something." "What is it, honey? Is everything all right?" "Maureen Doyle called me," she said. Maureen was the daughter of one of my oldest friends in Ukiah. "She said she saw you at the park today, with a man." The room seemed to tilt beneath me. "Oh?" I managed, trying to keep my voice steady. "She said you were kissing him, Mom. That he was young. That you looked like more than friends." Her voice was tight with emotion. "Tell me she's wrong. Tell me there's an explanation." I sank onto the edge of the bed, my legs suddenly unable to support me. I could lie, of course, make up some story. But I was tired of lying, tired of hiding. "His name is Jason," I said quietly. "He's a nurse practitioner at the clinic, and yes, we've been seeing each other." There was a long silence on the other end of the line, then Sarah's voice, incredulous and strained. "Mom, are you serious? You're having an affair? With a nurse? How old is he?" He's 33, I said, bracing myself for her reaction. 33? She nearly shouted it. Mom, he's younger than me. What are you thinking? Does Dad know? No, your father doesn't know. And I'm thinking that for the first time in years, I feel alive again. I feel seen. I feel valued. Oh my God, Sarah groaned. This is a disaster. You need to end it, Mom. Now. Before Dad finds out, before everyone in town knows. This will destroy him. It will destroy our family. I felt a flash of anger rise within me. Our family? Sarah, you and Michael live hundreds of miles away. You visit twice a year. What family are we preserving here? Your father and I have been living like roommates for a decade. He barely looks at me, barely speaks to me. So talk to him. Go to counseling. Don't throw away 40 years of marriage for some midlife crisis with a boy who's probably just using you. Her words stung, but they also steeled my resolve. He's not using me, Sarah. He loves me, and I love him. Love? She laughed, a harsh, disbelieving sound. Mom, be realistic. What could a 33-year-old man possibly want with a woman your age? This isn't love. This is him taking advantage of you, and you being flattered by the attention. I closed my eyes, fighting back tears. I had expected this reaction, but it hurt nonetheless. You don't understand, Sarah. You can't understand until you've been where I am, until you've spent years feeling invisible, feeling like your life is over. Jason makes me feel like I still matter, like I'm still a woman with desires and dreams. And Dad? What about him? Are you just going to throw him away after 40 years? I don't know what I'm going to do, I admitted. I'm still trying to figure that out. But I need you to trust that I'm not being naive or foolish. I know exactly what I'm doing, and I know the risks involved. I can't support this, Mom, Sarah said, her voice cold. I won't. And if you go through with this, whatever this is, don't expect me to welcome him into our family. Don't expect me to pretend this is normal. The call ended shortly after, with no resolution, no understanding. I sat on the bed for a long time, tears sliding down my cheeks. I had known this would be hard, but the reality was even more painful than I had imagined. Yet beneath the pain was a growing certainty. I couldn't go back to the way things were before. I couldn't unfeel what I felt for Jason, couldn't unsee the possibility of a different kind of life. Later that evening, as Carl and I sat watching TV in the living room, he in his recliner, me on the sofa, a physical distance that mirrored our emotional one, my phone chimed with a text message. I knew without looking that it was from Jason, but I didn't dare check it with Carl in the room. Aren't you going to see who that is? Carl asked, eyes still on the baseball game. It's probably just Sarah again, I said. I'll check it later. He nodded, seemingly satisfied with that explanation. But as the evening wore on, I felt an increasing tension in the room. Something had shifted. Perhaps it was just my own guilt and anxiety, but I couldn't shake the feeling that Carl suspected something. When we went to bed that night, each to our separate rooms, I finally checked my phone. I can't stop thinking about you. Whatever you decide, I'll support you. But know that I love you more than I've ever loved anyone. Jay. I pressed the phone to my heart, feeling both elated and terrified. In just a few short months, my safe, predictable life had been turned upside down. I was standing at a crossroads, facing the most consequential decision of my adult life. To stay in the comfortable familiarity of my marriage, accepting its limitations, its emptiness, for the sake of appearances and stability, or to leap into the unknown with a man who made my heart sing, who saw me, truly saw me, when I had been invisible for so long. As I drifted off to sleep, one thing became clear. There was no going back to the woman I had been before I met Jason. That Helen, resigned, diminished, fading into the background, was gone forever. In her place was someone new, someone awakened, someone who had remembered what it felt like to desire and be desired, to love and be loved. And no matter what I decided, that transformation was permanent. The week that followed was one of the most difficult of my life. I went through the motions of my daily routine, making meals, tending to the garden, reading books that I couldn't focus on, all while carrying on an internal debate that never ceased. Sarah called several more times, alternating between pleading with me to come to my senses and threatening to tell Carl herself if I didn't end things with Jason. Michael, whom Sarah had apparently informed, sent a terse email expressing his disappointment in my behavior. Only my friend Margaret, to whom I finally confided everything, offered a different perspective. "Life is short, Helen," she said as we sat in her garden, away from curious ears. "Too short to live it for other people. I was married to Frank for 35 years, and I loved him dearly. But there were times, especially toward the end, when I felt so lonely even with him right beside me. If I had found someone who made me feel alive again after he died, I would have grabbed that chance with both hands, no matter what anyone said." Her words stayed with me, reinforcing what I already knew in my heart. The time had come to make a choice. On the 7th day, a Friday, I woke early, before Carl was up. I sat at the kitchen table, drinking coffee, watching the sun rise over the hills to the east of Ukiah. It was going to be a beautiful day, clear and warm, typical of Northern California in early summer. I heard Carl stirring, the familiar sounds of him getting ready for the day, the bathroom door closing, water running, the creak of the floorboard outside our bedroom. When he came into the kitchen, I had a fresh cup of coffee waiting for him, as I had nearly every morning for 40 years. "Thank you," he said, taking the cup and sitting across from me. Something in my face must have alerted him that this wasn't a normal morning. "Everything all right?" I took a deep breath. "Carl, we need to talk." After my conversation with Sarah, I knew I had reached a point of no return. I couldn't continue living my double life, sneaking around, lying to Carl and to my children. I had to make a decision, and as I sat across from Carl at our kitchen table that morning, looking at this man who had been my husband for 40 years, I knew what that decision would be. "Carl, we need to talk." He lowered his coffee cup slowly, his eyes meeting mine. There was a wariness in them that I hadn't seen before, as if he already knew what was coming. "I'm not happy," I said simply. "I haven't been happy for a long time." He nodded slightly, not surprised. "Is this about that man from the clinic?" My heart skipped a beat. "You know, Helen, we live in Ukiah. People talk, and you've been different lately. The hair, the makeup, always going out." I took a deep breath. "His name is Jason, and yes, it's partly about him, but it's also about us, Carl, about what we've become, or rather, what we haven't been for years." "What do you want from me?" he asked, his voice flat. "I've given you a home, stability, a decent life, but not love," I said quietly. "Not companionship, not the feeling that I matter as a woman, not just as someone who cooks your meals and keeps your house." He looked down at his coffee cup, silent for a long moment. Then, "Are you leaving me?" The question hung in the air between us. I had been preparing for anger, for recriminations, for a fight, not for this quiet resignation. "Yes," I said finally, "I am." He nodded, as if confirming something he'd suspected for a while. "Where will you go?" "Jason has been offered a position in Sacramento. I'm going with him." "Sacramento," he repeated, as if trying to picture it. "And what will you do there, at your age?" There it was again, that reminder of my age, as if it was a prison sentence, a limitation on what I could still experience in life. "Live, Carl. I'll live." The conversation continued for a while longer. Practical matters, the house, our finances, what to tell people. Carl was surprisingly calm throughout, almost detached. It was as if we were discussing a business arrangement rather than the end of a 40-year marriage. In a way, that's what it had become. A business arrangement, a partnership of convenience rather than a union of love. When the conversation was over, I went to our bedroom, my bedroom, and began to pack. Not everything, just what I would need for now. The rest could be sorted out later. As I folded sweaters and slacks into my suitcase, I felt a strange mixture of emotions. Sadness for the end of something that had once held such promise. Guilt for the pain I knew I would cause. But also, undeniably, relief and excitement for what lay ahead. I moved out that weekend. I had expected more resistance from Carl, more emotion, but he remained stoic, almost indifferent. Perhaps he too had been merely existing in our marriage rather than living. Perhaps he too felt a kind of relief. Jason and I decided to stay in a hotel in Santa Rosa until we were ready to move to Sacramento. It was far enough from Ukiah to avoid running into people we knew, but close enough that I could still go back to deal with the practicalities of my separation. We took a small suite with a kitchenette, nothing fancy, but to me it felt like freedom. The first night in that hotel room, after we had brought in our bags and ordered dinner from a nearby restaurant, I stood by the window, looking out at the unfamiliar cityscape, feeling both terrified and exhilarated. "Are you okay?" Jason asked, coming up behind me and slipping his arms around my waist. "I'm not sure," I answered honestly. "I've just left my husband, my home, my entire life as I knew it. I don't know if that qualifies as okay." He turned me gently to face him. "Second thoughts?" "No," I said, surprising myself with how certain I felt. "Not about leaving. It was time. But about what comes next. Jason, are you sure about this? About us? I'm 61 years old. You're 33. That's not going to change. In fact, the gap will only become more apparent as time goes on." "Helen," he said, cupping my face in his hands, "I've never been more sure of anything. I'm not in love with some idealized version of you. I see you, your age, your experiences, all of it, and I love all of it." As he kissed me, I felt the last of my doubts melt away. Not because I believed that this relationship would be easy or that we wouldn't face challenges, but because I knew that whatever happened, I had made the right choice for myself. I had chosen to live fully, authentically, rather than to continue existing in the half-life I had accepted for so long. That night, in the unfamiliar bed of our hotel room, Jason and I made love for the first time. I had been nervous about this moment, self-conscious about my aging body, about the softness and the wrinkles that time had brought. But in the dim light of the bedside lamp, as he looked at me with such desire, such tenderness, I forgot to be ashamed. "You're beautiful," he whispered, his fingers tracing the curve of my waist, the softness of my belly. "So beautiful." And in that moment, I believed him. Not because I thought my body conformed to some conventional standard of beauty, but because I saw myself through his eyes, as a woman whole and complete, worthy of desire, worthy of love. His hands asked for permission, but my body already knew the answer. It responded to his touch with a hunger that surprised me, a passion I had thought long extinguished. Every caress, every kiss awakened nerve endings I had forgotten existed, brought to life parts of me that had been dormant for years. We took our time, exploring each other with the patience and curiosity of new lovers. There was none of the rushed urgency I remembered from my younger days, none of the performance or pretense. Just two people connecting, communicating through touch, through breath, through the language of desire that transcends age. Afterward, lying in his arms, my head on his chest, I felt tears come to my eyes, not from sadness, but from a profound sense of gratitude. Gratitude for this second chance, for this unexpected gift of being seen and desired again. "What are you thinking?" Jason asked, his fingers stroking my hair. "I'm thinking that I never expected to feel this way again," I said honestly. I had resigned myself to thinking that this part of my life was over. That passion, desire, those were things for the young. And now? "Now I know better," I smiled, tracing the lines of his face with my fingertips. "Now I know that the capacity for pleasure, for connection, doesn't diminish with age. It just needs the right person to awaken it." In the days that followed, Jason and I settled into a routine of sorts in our temporary home. He continued to work at the clinic in Ukiah, commuting the hour each way, while I dealt with the practicalities of my new life, opening a separate bank account, consulting a lawyer about the legal aspects of my separation, sorting through what to take and what to leave behind from my old life. I also spent time exploring Santa Rosa, wandering through its shops and parks, sitting in cafes with a book, enjoying the anonymity of being in a place where no one knew me or my story, where I wasn't poor Helen, who had left her husband for a younger man, or crazy Helen, having a late-life crisis. I was just a woman, living her life. One afternoon, I found myself in a lingerie shop in a mall on the outskirts of town. I had never been one for fancy undergarments. Practical cotton in neutral colors had always been my choice. But as I browsed the displays of silk and lace, I found myself drawn to a set in a deep red with delicate black lace trim. "Can I help you find anything?" a young saleswoman asked. I hesitated, feeling out of place among the younger shoppers, feeling as if I didn't belong in a store selling items meant to entice, to seduce. "I was just looking," I started to say, then stopped myself. Why was I apologizing for being here? Why was I acting as if desire, as if wanting to feel attractive, was something only for the young? "Actually, yes," I said with newfound confidence. "I'd like to try this set in my size." In the dressing room, I looked at myself in the mirror, the red silk against my pale skin, the lace accentuating rather than hiding my curves. I didn't see an old woman playing dress-up. I saw a woman embracing her sensuality, acknowledging her right to feel desirable, to want and be wanted. I bought the set, along with another in black, and a silk nightgown that felt like water against my skin. As the saleswoman wrapped my purchases in tissue paper, she smiled at me. "Someone's going to be very happy," she said with a wink. "Yes," I agreed, thinking of Jason. "But mostly that someone is me." That evening, when Jason returned from work, I was waiting for him in the red lingerie, my heart pounding with a mixture of nervousness and excitement. The look on his face when he saw me, surprise, delight, and intense desire, was worth every moment of self-doubt I had experienced. "Helen," he breathed, dropping his bag by the door. "You are stunning." He crossed the room in 3 strides and took me in his arms, his kisses urgent, passionate. We didn't make it to the bed that time, our desire too immediate, too consuming. Afterward, as we lay tangled together on the couch, both breathless and laughing, I felt a joy that was almost painful in its intensity. "I didn't know red could look like forgiveness," I said, tracing patterns on his chest. "Forgiveness?" For the years I spent denying this part of myself, for believing that desire had an expiration date, for thinking that my body was something to hide rather than to celebrate. He pulled me closer, his lips against my hair. "Then I'm glad we found each other. Glad I could help you rediscover this part of yourself." "It's not just about the physical," I said, wanting him to understand. "It's about feeling alive again, about remembering that I'm not just someone's wife, someone's mother, someone's grandmother, that I'm a woman with desires and dreams and a right to pursue them, no matter my age." "I know," he said simply. "That's what I've always seen in you, from the first day at the clinic. Not just a beautiful woman, but a soul still burning bright, still hungry for life." The weeks passed, and the day of our move to Sacramento drew closer. Jason had found an apartment there, a modern 2-bedroom with a balcony overlooking a park. We had gone to see it together, and as we walked through the empty rooms, I had tried to picture our life there. A fresh start, a new chapter. My children were still struggling with my decision. Sarah had barely spoken to me since our phone call, though she did send a terse email saying she hoped I knew what I was doing. Michael had called once, his tone more concerned than angry. "Are you sure this is what you want, Mom? It's a big change." "I'm sure," I told him. "For the first time in a long time, I'm making a choice for myself. Not as a wife, not as a mother, but as a woman who still has life to live." There was a pause, then a sigh. "I just want you to be happy, Mom. and safe. Just be careful, okay? I will, honey. And thank you for trying to understand. Carl and I had met again, this time with our lawyers, to discuss the division of our assets. It was civil, almost businesslike. We had agreed to sell the house and split the proceeds. Our retirement accounts would remain separate. We were lucky in a way. There wasn't much to fight over. A lifetime together, and it all came down to numbers on a page. After the meeting, as we stood in the parking lot of the lawyer's office, Carl looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Are you happy, Helen?" he asked. "With him?" I thought about the question, about what happiness really meant. Not just the heady excitement of new love, but the deeper satisfaction of being true to oneself. "Yes," I said simply. "I am." He nodded, his eyes distant. "I guess I should have seen it coming. We haven't really been married, not in the real sense, for a long time." "No," I agreed, "we haven't." "I didn't mean to let it happen," he said, and for the first time, I heard a note of real emotion in his voice. "To let us drift apart like that. I didn't know how to be different." I touched his arm gently. "I know, Carl, and I didn't speak up either. I accepted it, year after year. We're both responsible for what our marriage became." He looked down at my hand on his arm, then back up at my face. "He's a lucky man," he said finally. "I hope he knows that." As I drove back to the hotel that day, I found myself thinking about the nature of love and how it changes over time. How what starts as passion can cool into companionship, and how that can either deepen into a richer connection or fade into indifference. Carl and I had allowed ours to fade, had stopped nurturing it, had stopped seeing each other as individuals with needs and desires. We had become roles rather than people to each other, husband, wife, defined by duty and habit rather than by love. I didn't want that to happen with Jason. I wanted us to remain curious about each other, to continue seeing each other as we truly were, not as roles or functions. I knew it wouldn't be easy, that the initial intensity of our relationship would naturally evolve over time. But I was determined that we wouldn't lose sight of each other in the process. The night before we were to leave for Sacramento, Jason took me out for a special dinner at an upscale restaurant in Healdsburg. I wore a new dress I had bought for the occasion, a deep blue that complemented my eyes, with a V neckline that showed just a hint of cleavage and a hemline that fell just below my knees. "You look beautiful," Jason said, as we were seated at our table, a secluded spot by the window with a view of the garden. "Thank you," I smiled, no longer feeling self-conscious at the compliment. "You look pretty handsome yourself," and he did, in a charcoal gray suit that he'd bought specially for our move to Sacramento. His dark hair neatly styled, his green eyes bright with excitement. As we enjoyed our meal, a delicious seafood risotto for me, filet mignon for him, we talked about our plans for the new apartment, about exploring Sacramento together, about the life we would build there. I felt a mix of excitement and trepidation. At 61, I was starting over in a way I had never imagined. "Are you nervous?" Jason asked, reading my thoughts as he often seemed to do. "A little," I admitted. "It's a big step, a completely new life. But that's what makes it exciting, right? The unknown, the possibilities." I nodded, smiling at his enthusiasm. That was one of the gifts of being with someone younger, his sense that life was still full of potential, of adventures waiting to be had. It was infectious, making me feel that way too, despite the extra decades of experience that might have made me more cautious, more resigned. After dinner, as we walked back to our car hand in hand, Jason stopped suddenly under the glow of a street lamp. "Helen," he said, his expression serious, "I want you to know that I understand what you're giving up for me. Your home, your community, the comfort of the familiar. I know it hasn't been an easy decision, and I promise you that I will do everything in my power to make sure you never regret it." I reached up and touched his face, moved by his words. "I'm not giving up anything that truly matters," I said. "And I'm gaining so much more. A chance to live authentically, to love and be loved fully. How could I ever regret that? He kissed me then, under the stars in that quiet street, and I felt a certainty settle over me like a warm blanket. Whatever challenges lay ahead, and I had no illusions that there wouldn't be many, we would face them together, with open eyes and open hearts. The next morning, as we loaded the last of our suitcases into Jason's car, I took one final look around the hotel room that had been our temporary home. It wasn't much, just a generic room with a kitchenette and a view of a parking lot. But it had been the backdrop to a profound transformation in my life. It was where I had rediscovered desire, where I had learned to see myself anew, where I had found the courage to choose happiness over convention. "Ready?" Jason asked, standing by the door with my purse and his laptop bag. I nodded, taking a deep breath. Ready. As we drove north toward Sacramento and our new life together, I found myself thinking about the woman I had been just a few months ago. Faded, resigned, invisible. And about the woman I was becoming, vibrant, engaged, fully present in my own life. The transformation wasn't just in my appearance, though the auburn hair and the new clothes were external manifestations of it. It was a rebirth from within, a reclaiming of the essential self that had been buried beneath years of conformity and compromise. Jason leaned over and kissed me softly, his lips warm against mine. "I love you," he said, the words simple but profound. "I love you too," I replied, meaning it with every fiber of my being. As darkness fell and the first stars appeared in the night sky, we sat together in comfortable silence, content in each other's presence, grateful for the journey that had brought us to this moment, this place, this life we were creating together. I had been reborn at 61, not into youth, but into authenticity. Not into a denial of my age, but into a full embrace of it, with all the wisdom and experience it had given me, along with the recognition that growth, change, and joy were not the exclusive province of the young. They were the birthright of every human being at every stage of life, and I had finally claimed mine. I'll always remember the day I sat across from Carl and told him I was leaving. It wasn't a dramatic scene, no shouting, no tears, just the quiet ending of a 40-year marriage that had long since lost its heart. In the days that followed, I moved into a hotel with Jason while we finalized our plans for Sacramento. But there was one thing we both wanted to do before leaving Ukiah behind: mark our commitment to each other in some meaningful way. "It doesn't have to be fancy," Jason said one evening as we sat on the balcony of our hotel room watching the sun set over the hills. "Just something that's ours." "What did you have in mind?" I asked, my hand in his, still marveling at how natural it felt to be touched again after so many years of emptiness. "A private ceremony," he said, his eyes bright with the idea. "Not legal, obviously, just symbolic, just for us." The thought of it made my heart race. A ceremony. Something to mark the beginning of this new chapter in our lives. It was both terrifying and thrilling. "Where would we do it?" I asked. "I know the perfect spot," he smiled. "There's this hill just outside of town, overlooking the valley. It's beautiful at sunset. Private. No one would bother us there." I nodded, warming to the idea. "When? This weekend? Before we leave for Sacramento?" This weekend. So soon. But then again, why wait? I had waited decades already, marking time in a marriage that had become nothing more than habit. "Yes," I said, "this weekend." The next day, I found myself standing in a boutique in Santa Rosa, looking at dresses. I hadn't bought a special dress in years. What did one wear to a symbolic commitment ceremony with a man 28 years younger? I browsed through rack after rack, rejecting dress after dress. Too young, too matronly, too fancy, too plain. And then I saw it. A simple cream-colored dress with a subtle lace overlay. It had 3/4 length sleeves that would cover the softness of my upper arms, and the hemline fell just below my knees. It was elegant without trying too hard, age-appropriate without being dowdy. I took it to the dressing room with trepidation. At 61, trying on clothes was often an exercise in disappointment. The mirror rarely showed back what I hoped to see. But when I slipped the dress over my head and looked at my reflection, I felt a surge of emotion so powerful it brought tears to my eyes. The dress fit perfectly. It skimmed over my curves gently, the color warming my skin, making me look not young, no, but alive, present. The woman looking back at me from the mirror wasn't trying to recapture her youth. She was simply claiming her right to beauty, to desirability, at exactly the age she was. It was long, but it still fit, like me. The length was right for my age, my body, not too short, not too conservative. And the dress itself, like me, had lived long enough to be comfortable in its own skin. In that moment, standing in the dressing room of a boutique where no one knew me or my story, I felt a profound sense of peace. I was making the right choice. Not an easy choice, not a conventional choice, but the right one for me. I bought the dress, along with a pair of cream-colored low heels and a simple pearl necklace. The saleswoman wrapped everything carefully in tissue paper, placing it in a glossy shopping bag with ribbon handles. "Special occasion?" she asked. "Yes," I said simply. "Very special." The day of our ceremony dawned clear and warm. Jason had arranged everything. He had found a private spot on a hillside outside of town, with a view that stretched across the entire valley. He had bought a bottle of champagne and 2 crystal flutes. He had even picked wildflowers that morning to make a small bouquet. I got ready in our hotel room, taking my time with my hair and makeup. I wanted to look my best, not just for Jason, but for myself. This day marked something profound, my decision to choose myself, to claim my right to happiness regardless of what others thought. When I was ready, I stepped out of the bathroom to find Jason waiting. He was wearing a light gray suit with a white shirt, no tie. He looked young, handsome, and utterly sincere. When he saw me, his face lit up in a way that made me feel more beautiful than any mirror ever could. "Helen," he breathed. "You look—" I don't have the words. I smiled, feeling a blush warm my cheeks. "You look pretty handsome yourself." He took my hands in his expression growing serious. "Are you sure about this? About us? It's not too late to change your mind." I looked into his eyes, those green eyes that had seen me when I had been invisible for so long. I've never been more sure of anything in my life. We drove out of town in his car, the dress carefully arranged around my legs, the bouquet of wildflowers on my lap. The road wound up into the hills, past vineyards and orchards, until he turned onto a small dirt track that I would have missed if I'd been driving. "Almost there," he said, navigating the car carefully over the uneven ground. "It's just up ahead." We parked and walked the rest of the way, Jason carrying a small backpack with the champagne and glasses. The hill was steeper than I had expected, and I was a little breathless by the time we reached the spot he had chosen. But when I saw the view, I forgot my discomfort entirely. The hillside dropped away before us, revealing the entire valley spread out like a patchwork quilt of greens and golds. The late afternoon sun bathed everything in a golden light, and in the distance, the mountains were turning purple with the approaching sunset. "It's beautiful," I said, turning to face him. "Perfect." Jason set down the backpack and took both my hands in his. The breeze ruffled his dark hair, and his eyes were serious yet filled with joy. "I don't have a minister or a justice of the peace," he said. "Just my heart and these words." I nodded, too moved to speak. "Helen," he began, his voice clear and strong in the open air. "When I moved to Ukiah, I was running from grief, from loss, from the feeling that life was passing me by. I didn't expect to find love here, especially not with someone who would change the way I see the world. But from the moment I met you, something in me recognized something in you. Not just beauty, though you are beautiful to me. Not just kindness, though you are kind, but a depth, a wisdom, a capacity for joy that called to me. He squeezed my hands gently, his eyes never leaving mine. I know that what we're doing is unconventional. I know that people won't understand, but I don't need them to understand. All I need is you, your smile in the morning, your voice telling me about your day, your hand in mine as we walk through this life together. Tears were streaming down my face now, but I didn't care. They were tears of joy, of release, of finally being exactly where I was meant to be. I promise to love you, Helen, to see you, truly see you, every day, to value your wisdom, your experience, your unique perspective, to stand by you through whatever comes, whether it's joy or sorrow, ease or difficulty, to create a life with you that is rich in meaning, in connection, in love. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box. Opening it, he revealed a simple silver band. "This isn't a traditional wedding ring," he explained. "It's a promise ring, a symbol of my commitment to you, to us, to the life we're building together." He slipped the ring onto my finger. It fit perfectly. Now it was my turn. I had thought about what I wanted to say, had rehearsed it in my mind, but standing there in that beautiful place with this man who had awakened me to life again, the carefully prepared words fell away. What remained was simple truth. "Jason," I said, my voice surprisingly steady despite my tears. "For years, I lived in a kind of half-life. I was a shadow of myself, going through the motions, existing rather than living. And then you saw me. You really saw me when I had been invisible for so long." I took a deep breath, feeling the warm air fill my lungs, feeling more alive than I had in decades. "I bring to you a heart that has loved before, that has been broken, that has healed, that has learned. I bring to you a body that bears the marks of time, of childbirth, of life fully lived. I bring to you a mind that has gained wisdom through experience, through mistakes, through moments of both joy and sorrow." I looked up into his face, this face that had become so dear to me in such a short time. "I promise to love you with all that I am, to share with you the lessons of my life while remaining open to the lessons you have to teach me, to stand by you as your partner, your lover, your friend, to create with you a life of meaning, of purpose, of joy." I reached into the small beaded handbag I carried and pulled out a box of my own. Inside was a silver band, a match to the one he had given me. "This is my promise to you," I said, sliding it onto his finger. "A promise to love you, to choose you, every day." The setting sun painted the sky in shades of pink and gold as we stood there, our hands joined, our promises made. There was no minister to pronounce us anything, no legal document to sign. But in that moment, on that hillside, we were committed to each other in a way that felt more real, more sacred than any conventional ceremony could have been. Jason pulled me close then, his arms encircling me, his lips finding mine in a kiss that sealed our promises. I melted into him, feeling a sense of rightness, of homecoming that I had never experienced before. When we finally broke apart, he reached for the backpack and brought out the champagne and glasses. The cork popped with a festive sound, and he poured the bubbling liquid into the crystal flutes. "To us," he said, raising his glass, "to our beginning." "To us," I echoed, touching my glass to his. "To life fully lived." We drank, the champagne crisp and cold against the warmth of the evening, and then Jason pulled me into another embrace. We stood there for a long time, watching as the sun sank below the horizon and the first stars began to appear in the darkening sky. As we walked back to the car, hand in hand, my cream-colored dress caught on a bramble, leaving a small tear in the hem. I might have been upset once, at the imperfection, but now I merely smiled. The dress, like life, was not perfect. It bore marks of the journey, and that was as it should be. In the car, driving back toward Ukiah for what would be one of our last nights before the move to Sacramento, Jason reached across the console and took my hand. The silver ring on my finger caught the light from the dashboard, a tangible reminder of the promises we had made. "No regrets?" he asked, glancing over at me. "No regrets," I confirmed. "Only gratitude. For you, for this chance, for the courage to choose happiness, even when it wasn't the easy choice." That night, in our hotel room, we made love with a new depth of feeling, a new sense of connection. There was tenderness in every touch, meaning in every caress. We were no longer just lovers finding our way toward each other. We were partners who had made a commitment, who had chosen each other deliberately and with full awareness of what that choice meant. Afterward, lying in his arms, I thought about the dress hanging in the closet. The cream-colored dress that had fit so perfectly, that had made me feel beautiful and seen. The dress that now bore a small tear from our journey down the hillside, a mark of the path we had chosen to walk together. It was long, but it still fit. Like me, it was exactly right for this moment, for this stage of life. Not trying to be something it wasn't. Not pretending to youth or perfection. Simply being what it was meant to be. And that was enough. More than enough. It was everything. The next morning, as I packed the last of our things for the move to Sacramento, I folded the dress carefully and placed it in my suitcase. I would keep it, tear and all, as a reminder of that perfect evening on the hillside, of the promises we had made, of the life we were choosing to build together. As we loaded the car and prepared to leave Ukiah behind, I took one last look around the town that had been my home for so many years. I knew there would be challenges ahead. I knew that our unconventional relationship would face scrutiny, judgment, perhaps even rejection. I knew that the path we had chosen would not always be easy. But I also knew, with a certainty that ran bone deep, that it was the right path for me. For us. That at 61, I had found not just a second chance at love, but a first chance at truly living as my authentic self. And that was worth any price. As we drove away, leaving the familiar streets and buildings behind, Jason reached across the console and took my hand, his fingers warm and strong around mine. The silver ring caught the sunlight, flashing bright for a moment before settling into a steady glow. "Ready?" he asked. I squeezed his hand, feeling a surge of anticipation, of joy, of profound gratitude for this unexpected turn my life had taken. "Ready?" I said. And I was. Ready for whatever came next. Ready to embrace this new chapter, this new beginning. Ready to live, fully and without apology, as the woman I had finally allowed myself to become. It was the day I cried when he slipped the ring on my finger. And it wasn't the first time he had surprised me, but it was the first time I truly understood that life doesn't end at 60 or 70 or 80. It only ends when we stop being brave enough to live it. The news of my relationship with Jason spread through Ukiah faster than a California wildfire. Small towns have their own communication network, more efficient than any social media platform. It's amazing how quickly information travels when it's scandalous enough. And our story, it seemed, was scandalous indeed. The first signs came in the form of silence. When I walked into the grocery store the week after our hilltop ceremony, conversations suddenly stopped. Women who had greeted me warmly for years now averted their eyes or busied themselves examining produce with unusual intensity. The cashier who had always asked about my garden or my grandchildren now rang up my purchases with terse efficiency. No small talk, no smile. At first I told myself I was being paranoid, that it was all in my head. But then came the whispers, not quite quiet enough, as if they wanted me to hear. "There she is. Can you believe it? Left her husband for that young nurse. She must be crazy. Or rich. Why else would he be with her? Disgusting, if you ask me." The church, which had been my community for decades, became the epicenter of judgment. The Sunday after word got out, I walked into the Presbyterian church where I'd worshipped for over 30 years. I'd always sat in the same pew, Fifth row from the front, right side. As I made my way there, I noticed Mrs. Henderson, who'd always sat beside me, shift closer to her husband, leaving no room for me. I ended up sitting alone, 3 rows behind my usual spot, feeling the weight of stares on my back throughout the service. Afterward, during the coffee hour that had once been a time of warm fellowship, I found myself standing alone, cup in hand, as people moved in small, tight circles that somehow never included me. Pastor Williams, who had known me for years, who had counseled me through my grief when my mother died, who had baptized my grandchildren, approached me with a grave expression. "Helen," he said, lowering his voice, "I think we should talk. Perhaps you'd like to come to my office this week?" "What about, Pastor?" I asked, though I knew perfectly well. "I've heard things, and I'm concerned for your spiritual well-being." I straightened my back, feeling a surge of indignation. "My spiritual well-being has never been better, Pastor. I've found joy and love after years of emptiness. Isn't that what God wants for us? To live fully, to love deeply?" His expression hardened slightly. "There are God's laws to consider, Helen. Marriage vows are sacred. My marriage died long before I left, Pastor. It was just a shell, and nowhere in the Bible does it say that a woman in her 60s should resign herself to loneliness for the sake of appearances." He sighed. "The church is praying for you, Helen, for you to find your way back to the right path." I thanked him for his concern, placed my coffee cup on the nearest table, and walked out of the church. I haven't been back since. It was one of many losses I would experience, but also one of many liberations. The freedom from pretending, from conforming for the sake of others' comfort, was worth the pain of exclusion. My neighbors were no better than the church folk. The Robinsons next door, who had borrowed cups of sugar and shared garden produce with me for decades, suddenly became very busy whenever I waved hello. Their curtains would twitch as I came and went, but they never came out to speak to me. Patel across the street, who had always admired my roses, now crossed to the other side when she saw me coming. The whispers weren't limited to my presence. They traveled through phone lines, over garden fences, across bridge tables. Sarah called one evening, her voice tight with controlled anger. "Mom, do you know what Judy Robinson's daughter said to me at the pharmacy today? She asked if you were going through some kind of breakdown. She said everyone in town is talking about you leaving Dad for a boy toy." Those were her exact words, Mom. Boy toy. Do you have any idea how humiliating this is for all of us? I took a deep breath, trying to remain calm. "I'm sorry you're feeling embarrassed, Sarah, but I'm not responsible for the small minds and mean tongues in this town. I'm just living my life." "But why does your life have to include abandoning your family and running off with a man half your age? Can't you see how selfish that is? How it affects all of us?" The accusation of selfishness stung, perhaps because part of me feared it might be true. But then I thought about the 40 years I had spent putting everyone else's needs before my own. 40 years of being the good wife, the devoted mother, the supportive grandmother. 40 years of slowly disappearing. Sarah, I've spent my entire adult life thinking about how my actions affect others. I've made decisions based on what was best for your father, for you and your brothers, for everyone except myself. For once, I'm choosing my own happiness. And yes, maybe that seems selfish to you. But at 61, I think I've earned the right to be a little selfish. The line went quiet for a moment. Then, in a voice smaller than before, Sarah said, "Michael's kids are asking questions, Mom. What are we supposed to tell them? That Grandma left Grandpa for a younger man?" "Tell them the truth," I said. "That Grandma was unhappy for a long time, and she found someone who makes her happy. That's all they need to know." "They're confused," she persisted. "They don't understand why you can't visit them with Grandpa anymore. Why Christmas is going to be different now." The thought of not seeing my grandchildren for Christmas sent a pang through my heart. They were innocent in all this, caught in the crossfire of adult complexities. But I stood my ground. We can work something out with the holidays. I can see them separately from your father. Lots of families do that after a separation. It's not just about logistics, Mom. It's about what's right, what's normal. Normal. That word again. The standard by which my choices were being judged and found wanting. Maybe it's time to rethink what's normal, Sarah. Maybe normal shouldn't include spending decades in a loveless marriage just because that's what society expects. The conversation ended shortly after, with no resolution, no understanding reached. Sarah promised to call again soon, but her voice lacked conviction. I knew it might be a while before we spoke again. Another loss to add to the growing list. Even Jason wasn't immune to the town's judgment. The clinic where he worked became increasingly uncomfortable for him. Patients would request a different nurse. Colleagues who had once been friendly became distant. Dr. Matthews, who had initially welcomed Jason to the practice, called him into his office one day for a serious discussion. "The clinic has a reputation to maintain," Dr. Matthews had said, according to Jason. "We serve families, Jason. Conservative families. Your personal situation? It's becoming a distraction." Jason didn't quit. They didn't quite have grounds to fire him, but the atmosphere became so toxic that he began counting the days until we could leave for Sacramento. He would come home tense, his usual easy smile replaced by tight lines around his mouth. Yet he never once suggested that what we were doing might be a mistake. "It's worth it," he would say, pulling me close. "You're worth it." His family was another source of pain. His mother, who had been skeptical from the beginning, now refused to speak to him at all. When he called, she would either not answer or hand the phone to his stepfather, who would make excuses for why she couldn't come to the phone. His younger sister, with whom he had always been close, sent him a long email expressing her disappointment and concern about his choices. "They'll come around," he would say, though I could hear the hurt in his voice. "They just need time." I wasn't so sure. The gulf of understanding seemed vast, perhaps unbridgeable. And I felt responsible for the rift between Jason and his family. After all, if he had fallen in love with a woman his own age, they would likely have welcomed her with open arms. It was me, my age, my history, my very existence, that they found objectionable. "Maybe I should talk to your mother," I suggested one evening as we sat on the balcony of our hotel suite, watching the sunset. "Woman to woman. Help her understand that I'm not some predatory cougar who seduced her son." Jason laughed, though it held a note of sadness. "My mother is stubborn. Once she makes up her mind about something, it's very hard to change it. And besides, it's not just about you. It's about me, too. She can't understand why I would choose a life that's going to involve challenges." "You mean taking care of an old woman someday?" I said bluntly. He turned to me, his expression serious. "That's not how I see it, Helen. Yes, you're older than me. Yes, statistically speaking, you might need care before I do. But that's true in lots of relationships. Young people get sick too, get into accidents. Life doesn't come with guarantees for anyone. But your mother sees it differently. My mother sees what she wants to see. And right now, all she can see is that I'm making choices that don't align with her expectations. That make her uncomfortable. That might cause people to talk about her family. But she's not living my life. I am. And this is the life I choose." His certainty, his unwavering commitment despite the social costs, humbled me. Here was a young man with his whole life ahead of him, choosing a path that would inevitably involve complications, judgment, perhaps even ridicule. And he was doing it with clear eyes and an open heart. "I don't deserve you," I said softly. He took my hand, bringing it to his lips. "None of this is about deserving, Helen. It's about love. And love isn't something you earn or deserve. It's something you give and receive freely." It was a beautiful sentiment, one I wanted desperately to believe. But in my darker moments, alone with my thoughts, I couldn't help wondering if we were being naive, if the weight of society's disapproval would eventually crush what we were building together. If, someday, Jason would wake up and realize that he had sacrificed too much for a woman who would only grow older, more dependent, while he remained in the prime of his life. These thoughts haunted me most at night, when Jason was asleep beside me, his breathing deep and even. I would look at his face, so young, so unlined, and feel a stab of something like guilt. Was I robbing him of the life he should be having? With a woman his own age, with whom he could have children, build a conventional family, move through the world without constant judgment? But then morning would come, and with it, Jason's smile, his kiss, his absolute certainty that we were exactly where we were meant to be, and my doubts would recede, if not disappear entirely. The practical aspects of our lives continued to unfold. Carl and I finalized our separation agreement. The house would be sold, and we would split the proceeds. Our retirement accounts would remain separate. It was all very civilized, very calm. Too calm, perhaps. I almost wished for some emotion from him, anger, hurt, even hatred. Anything that would indicate that our marriage had meant something to him, that my leaving had affected him in some way beyond the inconvenience of having to learn to use the washing machine. But Carl remained stoic, almost indifferent. It was as if I had merely moved to a different room in the house, not a different life entirely. This, more than anything, confirmed that I had made the right decision. A man who could watch 40 years of marriage dissolve with barely a flicker of emotion was not a man who had been present in that marriage to begin with. The day the sale of the house closed, I met Carl at the lawyer's office to sign the final papers. Afterward, in the parking lot, he handed me a small paper bag. "What's this?" I asked. "Some of your mother's jewelry. I found it in the back of the closet when I was packing. Thought you might want it." I took the bag, touched by this small gesture of consideration. "Thank you." He nodded, hands in his pockets, looking at the ground rather than at me. "So, Sacramento, huh?" "Yes. Jason starts his new job next week. Big city, different from Ukiah." "That's part of the appeal," I admitted. "A fresh start, somewhere people don't know our story." He looked up then, his eyes meeting mine directly for the first time in what felt like years. "Are you happy, Helen? Really happy?" The question caught me off guard. In all our discussions about the practical aspects of our separation, we had never touched on emotions, on the human impact of our decisions. "Yes," I said simply. "I am." He nodded again, as if confirming something to himself. "Good. That's good." He turned to go, then paused. "You know, I think I might sell those birdhouses at the farmer's market in Fort Bragg instead of here. Change of scenery might be nice." It wasn't much, a tiny acknowledgement that perhaps he too felt the need for a fresh start. But it was something. A small crack in the wall of indifference he had built around himself. For the first time, I felt a flicker of hope that Carl might find his way to a fuller life too. That perhaps my leaving had been a catalyst not just for my own transformation, but for his as well. As I drove back to the hotel, I thought about the concept of home. For most of my adult life, home had been that house on Oak Street, with its familiar rooms, its garden where I had tended roses for decades, its kitchen where I had prepared thousands of meals. Now home was a hotel suite, and soon it would be an apartment in a city I had only visited a handful of times. But the strange thing was, I already felt more at home in that temporary space, with Jason, than I had in my house in Ukiah for many years. Because home, I was learning, wasn't about the physical structure, the accumulated possessions, the familiar routines. It was about where you felt seen, valued, alive. And for me, that was wherever Jason was. The whispers continued, of course. They would probably continue for as long as we remained in Ukiah. But as our departure date approached, they seemed to lose their power to wound. What did it matter what people said about us? We knew the truth of our relationship, the depth of our feelings for each other. We knew that what we were building together was real and valuable, regardless of the age difference, regardless of convention. One evening, about a week before we were set to leave, Jason and I took a walk through the town park, our park, where it had all begun. It was risky, being seen together in such a public place, but we were tired of hiding, tired of caring what others thought. And besides, we would be gone soon. What more damage could the gossips do? As we strolled along the familiar oak path, hand in hand, we passed a group of women who I recognized from church. They fell silent as we approached, then began whispering loudly as soon as we passed. Shameful. At her age. What is she thinking? I felt Jason's hand tighten around mine, saw his jaw clench with suppressed anger. But I squeezed his hand reassuringly and kept walking, head held high. "It doesn't bother you?" he asked when we were out of earshot. I considered this for a moment. "It bothers me," I admitted. "Of course it does. No one likes to be judged. But you know what I've realized? These people talking about us, they're not important to my life. They're not the ones who have to live it. I am. And I'd rather live authentically and be judged than live a lie and be praised." He stopped walking and turned to face me, his eyes filled with a mixture of admiration and love. "You are the strongest person I've ever known, Helen Bennett." I laughed softly. Not strong, just tired of being afraid, tired of being small. At 61, I finally figured out that life is too short for that. As we continued our walk, passing the pond where we had fed ducks, the bench where we had sat talking for hours, the gazebo where he had first kissed me, I felt a profound sense of gratitude. Not just for Jason and the love we had found together, but for the courage I had discovered within myself. The courage to choose a different path, to defy expectations, to claim my right to happiness regardless of my age or circumstances. Funny how no one cared when I was dying quietly inside, I mused as we made our way back to the car. But the moment I smiled, showed any sign of joy or life, I became the scandal. Jason nodded, understanding perfectly. People are comfortable with others' suffering as long as it's quiet, as long as it doesn't disrupt the status quo. It's the joy that threatens them, the defiance of expectations, the refusal to accept the limitations they've placed on you. "Well," I said, lifting my chin with newfound determination, "they'll just have to get used to being threatened, because I'm not going back to that half-life. Not for anyone." As we drove away from the park for the last time, I looked back at the town that had been my home for so many years. The familiar streets, the shops where I had been a regular customer, the church where I'd worshipped, the school where I had taught. All the places and people that had defined my existence for decades. And I felt a mixture of sadness and liberation. Sadness for what had been lost, for the connections broken, for the community that had rejected me when I dared to step outside their narrow definition of acceptable behavior. But liberation, too, from the constraints of that same community, from the expectations that had kept me small, from the fear of judgment that had ruled so much of my life. The whispers would fade with distance and time. New voices, new connections, new experiences awaited us in Sacramento. A fresh start in a city where we could simply be Helen and Jason. Not that older woman and her young lover. Not the subject of gossip and disapproval. A place where we could build our life together on our own terms, without the weight of history and small-town judgment. As Jason drove, one hand on the wheel, the other holding mine, I found myself thinking of a quote I had read somewhere. "Those who mind don't matter, and those who matter don't mind." It had taken me 61 years to truly understand those words, to recognize that the opinions that truly counted were few. My own, Jason's, perhaps my children's, once they had time to adjust. The rest were just noise. Whispers that could only hurt me if I gave them the power to do so. And I was done giving away my power, done shrinking myself to fit others' expectations, done apologizing for claiming my right to joy, to passion, to love. Let them whisper. I was too busy living to care. Sacramento was everything Ukiah wasn't. Busy, anonymous, diverse. Our apartment overlooked a small park where children played during the day and couples walked their dogs in the evenings. It was modern, with sleek appliances and neutral walls that felt like blank canvases waiting for our personal touches. No history, no memories, just possibility. The first morning I woke up there, sunshine streaming through unfamiliar windows, I experienced a moment of disorientation. Where was I? Then Jason shifted beside me, his arm tightening around my waist, and I remembered. I was in my new home, with my new love, in my new life. The realization brought a smile to my face and a lightness to my heart that I hadn't felt in decades. "What are you thinking about?" Jason asked, his voice still thick with sleep. "About how strange and wonderful it is to start over at 61, I replied, running my fingers through his dark hair, like being born again, but with all the wisdom of a lifetime behind me. That first week in Sacramento was a whirlwind of discovery. While Jason was at work at his new hospital position, I explored our neighborhood, finding the closest grocery store, the best coffee shop, the quickest route to the library. I discovered a farmer's market on Saturdays where I could buy fresh produce, a small park with a pond where I could read in the afternoons, a community center that offered art classes for seniors. I was nobody here, not Carl's wife, not the retired teacher, not the woman who had scandalized Ukiah by leaving her husband for a younger man. I was just Helen, a woman in her 60s with silver-streaked brown hair and laugh lines around her eyes. It was liberating to walk down the street without feeling the weight of judgment, without hearing whispers follow in my wake. One morning, about a month after our move, I stood in the bathroom looking at my reflection. The woman staring back at me was familiar yet changed. My hair, which I had always kept in the same style for years, suddenly seemed too safe, too much like the old Helen, the one who had lived her life according to others' expectations. On impulse, I picked up the phone and called a salon I had noticed a few blocks from our apartment. They had an opening that afternoon. "I want something different," I told the stylist, a young woman with purple hair and multiple ear piercings who introduced herself as Zoe. "Something that feels like me, but a new me." She studied my face, tilting her head thoughtfully. "I think I know just what you need." 2 hours later, I left the salon with my hair cut in a stylish bob and colored a rich auburn that brightened my complexion and brought out the blue in my eyes. It wasn't dramatically different. I hadn't gone platinum blonde or anything wild. But it was a change, a declaration of sorts. A way of saying to the world and to myself that I was embracing this new chapter fully. When Jason came home that evening and saw me, his face lit up with surprise and pleasure. "Helen, your hair. It's beautiful." "Do you like it?" I asked, suddenly a bit self-conscious. "It's not too young for me?" He came to me, taking my face in his hands. "It's perfect. It looks like you, the real you." That night, as we made dinner together in our new kitchen, something we'd started doing regularly, discovering the pleasure of creating meals side by side, Jason suggested another change. "Why don't we get you a new phone?" he said, chopping vegetables while I stirred sauce on the stove. "Something you can take pictures with, use for email, maybe even FaceTime with your grandkids." I hesitated. My old flip phone had served me well enough for years. I wasn't sure I could learn all the complexities of a smartphone at my age. "I don't know, Jason. Those things are so complicated." "I'll teach you," he promised, "and they're more intuitive than you think. Besides, it would be a good way to stay connected with your family, especially while things are strained." He was right about that. My relationship with my children was still difficult. Sarah had barely spoken to me since our move, though she did send stiff, formal emails updating me on my grandchildren's activities. Michael called occasionally, our conversations gradually becoming less awkward, but still far from the easy relationship we'd once had. Only Paolo, my eldest, seemed to be making a genuine effort to understand, calling weekly and even suggesting a visit once you're all settled in. The next day, Jason took me to a store where a patient young man explained the basics of smartphones to me. I left with a sleek device that seemed to have more capabilities than the first computer my school had acquired back in the 1990s. True to his word, Jason was a patient teacher. He showed me how to make calls, send texts, take photos, even use something called FaceTime. At first, I felt clumsy and foolish, my fingers too slow and uncertain on the glass screen. But gradually, I began to get the hang of it. My first successful FaceTime call was with Paolo and his children. Seeing their faces on the small screen, my son's kind eyes, my grandchildren's gap-toothed smiles, brought tears to my eyes. "Grandma, your hair is red," 8-year-old Emma exclaimed. "You look pretty." "Thank you, sweetheart," I laughed, wiping away tears. "It's called auburn. Do you like it?" "I love it. Mom says only teenagers dye their hair, but you're way older and you look awesome." Paolo winced at his daughter's bluntness, but I just laughed again. Sometimes we need a change, no matter how old we are. After the call, I sat on the sofa, my new phone in my hand, feeling a mix of emotions. Joy at seeing my grandchildren, sadness at the distance between us, hope that bridges could be rebuilt over time. Jason sat beside me, his arm around my shoulders. "You okay?" "Yes," I said, leaning into him. "Just thinking about how technology can bring us closer, and yet there's still this gap, not just physical distance, but everything else." "It will take time," he said, echoing my own thoughts. "But this is a start." Over the following weeks, I continued to embrace change. I bought new clothes, not trying to look young or trendy, but simply choosing items that felt like me, that made me feel good. I discovered I liked bright colors, interesting textures, styles I had never tried before because they hadn't fit my idea of what was appropriate for a woman my age. I started exploring activities I had always been curious about but had never pursued. I joined a watercolor painting class at the community center, revealing a modest talent I hadn't known I possessed. I attended lectures at the local library, expanding my mind with new ideas and perspectives. I even tried yoga, modified for seniors, finding unexpected pleasure in the gentle stretching and mindful breathing. Our apartment began to reflect these changes too. We hung colorful artwork on the formerly blank walls, some purchased from local artists, some my own humble creations from my painting class. We filled bookshelves with volumes that reflected our shared and individual interests. We put photos in frames, some from our past lives, but mostly new ones we were taking together, documenting our adventures in our new city. Jason was thriving in his new position at the hospital. He came home energized, full of stories about his colleagues, his patients, the challenges and rewards of his work. I loved listening to him, loved seeing the passion in his eyes when he talked about making a difference in people's lives. And he listened to me too, really listened, when I talked about my day, my thoughts, my fears and hopes. It was a kind of emotional intimacy I had forgotten could exist between two people. Not just physical closeness, though we had that too in abundance, but a meeting of minds and hearts that made each day feel rich with meaning. One evening, as we sat on our small balcony watching the sunset over the park, Jason handed me a small, flat package wrapped in simple brown paper. "What's this?" I asked, surprised. "Just a little something I thought you might like." I unwrapped it to find a beautiful leather-bound journal, the cover soft and supple, the pages thick and cream-colored. "I thought maybe you could write down your story," he said. "Not just for yourself, but maybe for others too. Your journey, your wisdom. It could help people who are where you were, feeling trapped, invisible, thinking it's too late for change." I ran my fingers over the journal, touched by his thoughtfulness, by his belief in me. "Do you really think anyone would want to read what I have to say? I think there are a lot of women out there, especially women your age, who feel the way you felt in Ukiah, who've been told directly or indirectly that their time for joy, for passion, for reinvention is over, who've accepted fading into the background because that's what society expects of them. Your story could show them another way. That night, I sat at our kitchen table while Jason slept, the journal open before me, pen in hand. I began to write, hesitantly at first, then with growing confidence. I wrote about my marriage to Carl, how we had gradually lost sight of each other, how I had lost sight of myself. I wrote about meeting Jason, about the fear and the joy of discovering that I could still feel, could still love, could still be loved. I wrote about the judgment we had faced, the whispers, the rejection, and I wrote about our new life, about the rebirth I was experiencing in my 7th decade. The words flowed easily, filling page after page. It wasn't great literature, but it was honest. It was my truth, and maybe, just maybe, it could speak to someone else who needed to hear it. As the weeks turned into months, I continued to write in my journal, continued to explore and grow. I learned to use social media, cautiously, selectively, connecting with online communities of women my age who were challenging stereotypes and expectations. I discovered blogs and books by older women embracing their authenticity, refusing to disappear or apologize for continuing to evolve. I found myself becoming more outspoken, less concerned with pleasing others or conforming to their expectations. Not in an aggressive or confrontational way, but simply by being true to myself, by expressing my thoughts and feelings without the filter of, what will people think? Jason encouraged this evolution, this uncovering of the authentic Helen. He never tried to make me into someone I wasn't, never asked me to be younger or different than I was. Instead, he celebrated each new facet of myself that I discovered or reclaimed. "You're like a flower blooming in reverse," he said one night as we cooked dinner together, something we had come to cherish as our special time of connection at the end of each day. Most flowers start fully open and gradually close. But you started closed, and now you're opening more each day. I laughed, stirring the pasta sauce I was making. That's a lovely image, but I'm not sure flowers work that way. Maybe not, he agreed, chopping herbs with the precision his nurse's training had given him. But you do, and it's beautiful to watch. Our life together fell into comfortable rhythms, but never into the kind of stagnation I had experienced with Carl. We had routines, morning coffee on the balcony, evening walks in the park, Sunday brunches at our favorite cafe, but there was a mindfulness to them, a presence that kept them from becoming mere habits. And we had spontaneity, too. Weekend trips to explore nearby towns or natural areas. Impulsive decisions to try a new restaurant or attend a concert. Small surprises for each other. A book I thought he might enjoy. A plant he brought home because it reminded him of me. In the bedroom, our connection continued to deepen and evolve. There was no diminishing of desire, no taking each other for granted. Instead, there was a growing understanding of each other's bodies, each other's needs and responses, a deepening intimacy that transcended the physical while celebrating it. "He didn't complete me," I wrote in my journal one night. "He reminded me I was never missing." That was the truth of it. Jason hadn't saved me or fixed me or made me whole. I had always been whole, beneath the layers of expectations and compromises and self-denial. He had simply seen that wholeness when others, including myself, had forgotten it was there. My relationships with my children began to heal, slowly but steadily. Paolo was the first to visit, coming alone initially to check things out, as he put it. I knew he was worried about me, concerned that I might be being taken advantage of or making a huge mistake. But he was willing to keep an open mind, to see for himself what Jason and I had together. The visit was a success beyond my hopes. Paolo and Jason connected over a shared love of hiking and craft beer. They spent a day exploring trails in the foothills while I had lunch with a friend I had made in my painting class. When they returned, laughing and comfortable with each other, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders that I hadn't even known I was carrying. "He's a good guy, Mom," Paolo said later, when Jason was in the shower. "I can see why you love him." "Thank you for giving him a chance," I said, tears pricking at my eyes. it means more than I can say. Michael visited next, more reserved than his brother, but making a genuine effort. He brought his son, 10-year-old Alex, who was initially shy around Jason, but soon warmed up when Jason showed him how to play a simple card game. Sarah remained the holdout. She maintained minimal contact through formal emails and occasional phone calls that always seemed to end in tension. But even she was beginning to soften, agreeing to let her children FaceTime with me regularly, sending photos of school events and sports games. Time, Jason would remind me when I grew discouraged. Just give it time. And he was right. As months passed, as it became clear that our relationship wasn't a temporary madness, but a genuine, lasting love, even Sarah began to thaw. She didn't visit, didn't fully accept, but the sharp edges of her disapproval began to blur and soften. My life with Carl seemed increasingly distant, like a movie I had watched rather than a life I had lived. I still thought of him occasionally, wondering how he was doing, hoping he had found some measure of happiness or at least contentment. Paolo mentioned that he was dating someone, a widow from his church, and I was genuinely glad for him. Perhaps he too was finding his way to a more authentic life. One day, nearly a year after our move to Sacramento, I was sorting through some old boxes that had been in storage, the last remnants of my life in Ukiah. Among photo albums and keepsakes, I found a small, tarnished key that I didn't immediately recognize. Then it came to me. It was the key to a small decorative box my mother had given me on my 16th birthday. The box itself was somewhere in another container, but seeing the key triggered a flood of memories. My mother had been a woman of her time, born in the 1920s, raised during the Depression, married young to my father, a man who, like Carl, had provided well but remained emotionally distant. She had lived within the narrow confines of what was expected of women of her generation, finding what joy and meaning she could in those limitations. On my 16th birthday, she had given me the small wooden box with brass hinges and the tiny key. "For your secrets, your dreams," she had said. I had used it to store letters from friends, pressed flowers, movie ticket stubs, the small treasures of adolescence. Later, as an adult, it had become a repository for other things, a lock of hair from each of my children when they were babies, the ribbon from my bridal bouquet, the program from my college graduation. Touchstones of a life. When had I stopped adding to it? When had it been relegated to the back of a closet, forgotten? That evening, I showed the key to Jason. "There's a box that goes with this somewhere," I explained. "A keepsake box my mother gave me long ago." We spent the evening searching through the remaining containers until we found it, tucked between winter sweaters in a cardboard box. It was smaller than I remembered, the wood darkened with age, the brass hinges tarnished. The key still worked. The lock turned with a soft click, and I lifted the lid to reveal the mementos of my life, layered like geological strata. Baby hair, fine as silk. A dried rose crumbling with age, yellowed papers folded and refolded over decades. Jason watched as I carefully sifted through these artifacts of my past, respectful of their significance to me. "We should get you a new box," he said, "for new memories." I looked up at him, this man who had helped me reclaim my life, who had seen me when I was invisible, who loved me as I was while encouraging me to become more fully myself. "Yes," I agreed. "A new box for a new chapter." The next day, he came home from work with a beautiful wooden box, larger than my old one, with a modern, clean design, but the same warmth and craftsmanship. "For your secrets, your dreams," he said, echoing my mother's words from so long ago, though he couldn't have known them. I began filling it immediately. A smooth stone from our first hike together in the foothills, a receipt from our favorite cafe, a pressed flower from a bouquet he had given me on the 6-month anniversary of our move, tangible reminders of this new life we were building together. But more important than these physical mementos were the intangible ones, the memories we were creating, the connections we were forming, the selves we were becoming together and individually. I continued to write in my journal, filling one volume and starting another. I began to share some of what I wrote with a small online community of women my age, finding to my surprise that my words resonated with many of them. Women who, like me, had felt invisible, had accepted limitations that were not of their choosing, had forgotten or never known that they could still grow, still change, still desire, and be desired. Jason continued to thrive in his work, earning the respect of his colleagues, making a difference in the lives of his patients. He brought that same care, that same attentiveness to our relationship, never taking for granted what we had found together. Our life wasn't perfect. We had disagreements, miscommunications, moments of frustration or doubt. The age difference between us did create challenges at times. Different energy levels, different cultural references, different perspectives shaped by the eras in which we had come of age. But we faced these challenges openly, honestly, with a commitment to understanding each other and finding common ground. And there were external challenges too. Though Sacramento was more anonymous than Ukiah, we still occasionally encountered raised eyebrows or disapproving looks when we were out together. Jason's mother continued to maintain a cool distance, though she had grudgingly accepted his invitations to visit twice, each time leaving more quickly than planned. But these difficulties were small shadows in a landscape of light. They couldn't diminish the joy we found in each other, in our shared life, in the people we were becoming together. One evening, as we sat on our balcony watching the sunset, Jason playing his guitar softly while I sketched the view, I was struck by a profound sense of rightness, of being exactly where I was meant to be, with exactly the person I was meant to be with, doing exactly what I was meant to be doing. It wasn't a feeling I had experienced often in my life. Perhaps in brief moments, holding my newborn children, watching my students' faces light up with understanding, standing on a mountaintop during a family vacation long ago. But never as a sustained state, never as the foundation of my daily existence. "What are you thinking?" Jason asked, noticing my contemplative expression. "I'm thinking about how lucky I am," I said, "not just to have found you, though that's certainly true, but to have found myself, to have had the courage to choose a different path when the one I was on had stopped leading anywhere I wanted to go." He set down his guitar and took my hand, his expression serious. "It wasn't luck, Helen. It was courage. The courage to listen to your heart, to honor your own needs and desires, to risk security for authenticity. Not everyone has that kind of courage, especially after decades of putting others first." I squeezed his hand, grateful for his understanding, for his recognition of the journey I had taken. "Well, then I'm lucky to have found that courage, even if it took me 61 years to do it." As the sun slipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, I thought about the woman I had been a year ago, the faded, diminished Helen who had accepted invisibility as the price of aging, who had resigned herself to a half-life of quiet desperation. And I thought about the woman I was becoming, vibrant, engaged, fully present in my own life. The transformation wasn't just in my appearance, though the auburn hair and the new clothes were external manifestations of it. It was a rebirth from within, a reclaiming of the essential self that had been buried beneath years of conformity and compromise. Jason leaned over and kissed me softly, his lips warm against mine. "I love you," he said, the words simple but profound. "I love you too," I replied, meaning it with every fiber of my being. As darkness fell and the first stars appeared in the night sky, we sat together in comfortable silence, content in each other's presence, grateful for the journey that had brought us to this moment, this place, this life we were creating together. I had been reborn at 61, not into youth, but into authenticity. Not into a denial of my age, but into a full embrace of it, with all the wisdom and experience it had given me, along with the recognition that growth, change, and joy were not the exclusive province of the young. They were the birthright of every human being, at every stage of life, and I had finally claimed mine. Discovered that pleasure doesn't have an expiration date, only an ending through cowardice. It's been almost 3 years since that moment on the hillside when Jason and I made our promises to each other. 3 years of building a life together in Sacramento, of navigating the complexities of our unconventional relationship, of weathering judgment and celebrating acceptance where we found it. 3 years of growth, of joy, of love, deeper and richer than I had ever imagined possible at this stage of life. Our apartment has become a true home, filled with books and artwork and photographs that tell the story of our shared life. The balcony overlooking the park is my favorite spot. I sit there in the mornings with my coffee, watching the world wake up, feeling a contentment that once seemed beyond my reach. Jason continues to thrive in his position at the hospital. He's been promoted twice, his natural talent for healing and his extraordinary compassion recognized and rewarded. I couldn't be prouder of him, of the way he touches lives every day with his skill and his kindness. My own life has expanded in ways I never anticipated. That journal Jason gave me has led to unexpected places. I started a blog, sharing my experiences as a woman rediscovering herself in her 60s. To my surprise, it has resonated with women across the country and even beyond our borders. I receive emails and comments daily from women telling me that my words have given them courage, have made them question the limitations they've accepted, have inspired them to seek more from life regardless of their age. "You've helped me see that I'm not invisible," one woman wrote. "That I still have value, still have desires that deserve to be honored, still have a life worth living fully." I've even been asked to speak at conferences and workshops, sharing my journey with women who find themselves where I was, faded, diminished, resigned to a half-life because society has told them their time for passion and purpose has passed. My relationship with my children has healed, though it took time and patience. Paulo visits regularly, often bringing his children who have grown to adore Uncle Jason and his boundless energy for games and adventures. Michael calls weekly, and we've established a warm, honest relationship that in some ways is stronger than what we had before. Even Sarah has come around, grudgingly at first, but with increasing openness. She visited last Christmas, watching with obvious surprise as Jason and I moved around each other in the kitchen, preparing the holiday meal together with the easy synchronicity of a couple deeply attuned to each other. "You really love him, don't you?" she asked when we were alone, washing dishes after dinner. "With all my heart," I replied simply. She nodded, her expression thoughtful. "And he loves you. I can see that now." It wasn't a full blessing, but it was acceptance, and that was enough. Jason's family has been a slower journey. His mother gradually softened her stance, moving from outright rejection to reluctant tolerance to, finally, a kind of wary acceptance. We visit her in Chicago twice a year, and while our relationship will never be warm, there is at least peace between us. His sister, younger and more adaptable, has become a genuine friend, calling often and visiting when she can. Our life together isn't perfect, of course. No relationship is. We've had our disagreements, our moments of frustration, our challenges unique to our particular situation. The age difference that seemed abstract in the beginning has sometimes manifested in tangible ways. Different energy levels, different perspectives shaped by our different generational experiences, different expectations about the future. I worry sometimes about what will happen as I continue to age. I'm 64 now, still vibrant and healthy, but I know that won't always be the case. Will Jason resent becoming a caregiver if that time comes? Will he regret choosing a partner who will inevitably face the challenges of aging decades before he will? When I voice these fears, Jason meets them with his characteristic combination of honesty and compassion. "Helen, none of us knows what the future holds," he says. "Yes, statistically speaking, you'll likely face health challenges before I do, but that's not guaranteed. Life doesn't follow statistics. What matters is that we face whatever comes together, with love and respect for each other." And he's right, of course. There are no guarantees in life, no matter the age of your partner. All we have is now, this moment, and the love we choose to give and receive in it. We still encounter judgment occasionally. a raised eyebrow from a waiter when we request a romantic table at a restaurant, a surprised glance from a sales clerk when Jason refers to me as his partner. But these moments have less power to wound now. They're mere ripples on the surface of a life rich with meaning and connection. And we've found community too, other couples with significant age differences who understand our particular joys and challenges. A monthly dinner group has formed where we can share stories and advice without the need to explain or defend our choices. There's Maria and Daniel, she's 58, he's 35, Robert and Jennifer, he's 72, she's 51, Thomas and David, 71 and 44. Different configurations, different stories, but a shared understanding that love doesn't conform to conventional timelines or societal expectations. I've stayed in loose touch with Carl over the years. We exchange birthday and Christmas cards, and occasionally speak on the phone when there's some practical matter to discuss. He remarried last year, a widow from his church, as Paolo had mentioned. I was genuinely happy for him. Perhaps he too has found a more authentic way of being, a relationship built on true connection rather than mere habit and obligation. The house in Ukiah sold eventually, though the real estate market had slowed. We split the proceeds as agreed. Carl bought a smaller place closer to his woodworking studio. I invested my share, adding to the retirement funds that ensure I will never be financially dependent on Jason, a point that was important to both of us. As for Ukiah itself, I haven't been back. There's nothing there for me now but memories, most of which have lost their power to evoke either joy or pain. They've faded into the background, like old photographs stored in a box, acknowledged but no longer defining. Sometimes I think about Mrs. Henderson at church, who shifted away when I tried to sit in my usual pew. About Donna Cleed asking what people were saying about me, her face a mask of disapproval thinly disguised as concern. About Pastor Williams praying for my spiritual well-being. I wonder if any of them ever questioned the rigid boundaries they had placed around what was acceptable, what was proper, what was possible for a woman of a certain age. I hope so. I hope that in some small way, my choice to prioritize my own happiness, my own authenticity, might have caused at least one person to reconsider those boundaries, to question whether adhering to convention at the cost of joy is really the right choice, the moral choice, the only choice. Because that's what I've learned these past 3 years, that there are always choices, always possibilities for growth and change and joy, regardless of age or circumstances. That the capacity for love, for passion, for reinvention doesn't diminish with time unless we allow it to. That the only true constraints are the ones we accept for ourselves. Jason and I have talked about marriage. Legally, there's nothing stopping us. But we've decided that we don't need that formal recognition, that piece of paper. What we have, our promises to each other on that hillside, our daily choice to build a life together, is more meaningful to us than any legal certificate could be. "You're my person," Jason often says. "That's all that matters." And he's right. He's my person. The one who sees me, who delights in me, who challenges me to grow while accepting me exactly as I am. The one who has taught me that love isn't about need or obligation or security, but about choice and freedom, and the courage to be fully alive. Last week, we took a vacation to the coast, renting a small cottage overlooking the Pacific. We spent our days walking on the beach, exploring tide pools, reading books side by side, cooking simple meals with fresh seafood from the local market. One evening, as we sat on the deck watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and pink, Jason took my hand. "Happy?" he asked. I looked at him, at this extraordinary man who had entered my life when I least expected it and transformed it completely. At the laugh lines around his eyes, the streak of silver that had appeared at his temple, the familiar curve of his smile that still made my heart beat faster. "Profoundly," I replied. And it was true. Not the giddy, breathless happiness of new love, though that had been wonderful in its time, but something deeper, richer, more enduring. The happiness that comes from being fully present in your own life, from loving and being loved authentically, from making peace with your past while embracing your future with open arms and an open heart. Later that night, as we lay together in the moonlight streaming through the cottage window, I found myself thinking about that cream-colored dress I had worn for our hillside ceremony. It hangs in our closet still, the small tear in its hem never mended, a reminder of the path we had chosen to walk together. It was long, but it still fit. Like me, it was exactly right for the moment, for the purpose, for the woman I had become. Not perfect, not flawless, but authentic. Real. Mine. As I drifted toward sleep, Jason's arms around me, his heartbeat steady and reassuring against my back, I realized something important. The title of this chapter of my life isn't The Older Woman and Her Young Lover. It isn't The Scandalous Choice or The Late Life Rebellion. It's simply Helen, Finally. The story of a woman who, at 61, remembered that she was still alive, still worthy of desire, still capable of growth and change and joy, who chose happiness over convention, authenticity over safety, living fully over merely existing. They say it's never too late to become who you were always meant to be. At 64, I can attest to the truth of that statement. But I would add something to it. It's never too late unless you believe it is. Unless you accept the limitations that society, family, or your own fear would place upon you. Unless you convince yourself that your time for joy, for passion, for authentic living has somehow expired. I discovered that pleasure doesn't have an expiration date. It only ends when we surrender to cowardice, when we choose the safety of the familiar over the risk of the unknown, when we allow others' expectations to define our possibilities. Life is too short for that kind of surrender, that kind of cowardice, that kind of living death. Whether you're 21 or 41 or 61 or 81, you deserve to live fully, to love deeply, to be truly seen and valued for who you are. That's what I've learned. That's what I would tell any woman who finds herself where I was, invisible, diminished, believing the lie that her time for joy has passed. Your time is now. Your life is now. Your right to happiness, to pleasure, to love is now. Claim it. Even if it means making waves, even if it means facing judgment, even if it means walking away from the safety of the familiar into the uncertainty of the unknown. The reward is beyond measure, the chance to finally become yourself, fully and without apology. To look in the mirror and recognize the woman looking back at you, not as a role or a function or an age, but as a whole human being with desires and dreams and an infinite capacity for growth and joy. That's what Jason gave me. Not love, though he has given me that too in abundance, but the recognition that I was already complete, already worthy, already deserving of love and pleasure and authentic living. That I didn't need to apologize for continuing to want those things at 61 or 64 or whatever age might come. And that's what I hope my story might give to someone else. Not permission. You don't need anyone's permission to live authentically. But perhaps a reminder that it's possible, that it's never too late, that the only real constraints are the ones we accept for ourselves. As for Jason and me, we'll continue to build our life together, day by day, choice by choice, moment by moment. We don't know what the future holds. No one does. But we know that whatever comes, we'll face it together, with love and respect and the deep joy that comes from truly seeing and being seen by another person. And that, more than anything, is what makes life worth living at any age. At 61, I cried when it slipped in. And it wasn't the first time he surprised me. But it was the first time I understood that life doesn't end at 60 or 70 or 80. It only ends when we stop being brave enough to live it. And I, for one, intend to live mine fully, authentically, and without apology for as long as I possibly can. They said I was too old. I say I was just late to the party. And what a glorious party it's turning out to be. I'm curious about where you're hearing my story from today. Let me know in the comments where you're located. I'd love to know how far these words have traveled, and perhaps to discover that we're neighbors in this journey of rediscovering ourselves at any age.